I don't own the rights to Love Over Gold, something for which I'm daily grateful. Love Over Gold, Chapter 1, Part 2. The Rome offices of Cadogan's, dealers in fine art, were situated just off the Via Condotti. Standing in the wood-panelled boardroom, Matthew sipped champagne and thought wryly that if his colleagues were devastated by the fact that he was leaving the next day, they were doing a good job of concealing it, even though over the past 18 months he had come to know most of them pretty well, and to like them. They appeared to like him too, always a bonus in a working environment. Cadogan's occupied a small but prestigious place in the world's art markets, which were still, thanks to the big auction houses of Sotheby's, Christie's and Phillips, dominated by London. Matthew had been taken on by the fine art department a couple of years after leaving university. Since then, he had built up a particular field of expertise in work by younger painters, and seemed to have developed an uncanny feel for which artists would become stars and which would merely burn for a brief space of time before fizzling out. That's convenient because it means the writers didn't have to do any research into art for this. It was this aptitude which had placed him so firmly in the fast lane at Cadogan's and ensured his phenomenally swift rise through the ranks. Thanks to his fluency in both French and Italian, he had been promoted 2 years ago to head the foreign art department. The posting to Italy had merely been one more step in his route to the top. An early directorship was already being hinted at. He enjoyed his work. He liked jet-setting about the globe. He relished the lifestyles of the rich and famous, which he briefly shared each time he was called in to advise on some collection or suggest a new acquisition, a change in direction. Collectors, he had found, were often unsure of their own tastes and liked to have the reassurance of an expert opinion before they actually opened their checkbooks and began signing on the dotted line. He glanced around the room. Surely one of the most luxuriously furnished business environments in Europe. It was crammed with sculptures and paintings. Display cabinets housed porcelain and silver. Among the pieces of furniture were 2 or 3 examples of the finest 17th century Italian craftsmanship outside a museum. Ironic, considering that Cadogan's had built their reputation on specialising in modern art. Rather like the kind of architect he mused who designs ultra-futuristic dwelling modules for other people, but prefers himself to live in a thatched cottage full of oak beams and ingle nooks. Full of them. Not that he had anything against ingle nooks, for heaven's sake. In fact, the bonuses he had gained over the past 18 months might go a long way towards the purchase of one when he got back. Plus the cottage to go round it. It was something he had been considering for a long time. London living, according to his friends back home, was growing ever more stressful, and a place in the country, as well as sounding good, might be considered almost a necessity for the up-and-coming art investment man. If he closed his eyes, he could almost see it. Roses round the door, twisted apple trees in the rough grass at the back, whitewashed plaster, raspberry canes, and... "You all right, Matthew?" It was Charlie Tempest, who had joined the firm at the same time as himself, and whose career had followed an almost identical path, except that Charlie was permanently based in Rome after he married the daughter of a steel manufacturer from Turin, and unlike Matt, had found his career more or less happily on hold. Absolutely fine. Matthew cheerfully abandoned the Phantom Cottage. "How did you get on with the San Lorenzos?" "Like Riccardo, haven't yet met Carlo." Matthew laughed. "Ha ha! From the way his uncle speaks of him, I should think I'd loathe him." A common enough impulse among those who come into contact with him, sighed Charlie. He was a tall, thin man with a permanently melancholy expression. According to his uncle, if ever a man was asking for a boot up the backside, it's Carlo, Matthew said. I gather that among other faults, he not only loathes modern art, but also thinks he's God's gift to womankind. Charlie nodded gloomily. Trouble is, enough women share his opinion for him to have no cause to revise it. I hate to think what will happen to Riccardo's collection if Carlo ever gets his hands on it. Which is why, dear boy, I presume you spent the past week doing your best to see that that whole deal is closed up tighter than a Scotsman's purse. Racist? Something like that. Matthew laughed again. Carlo's in for some nasty surprises. Good, there's probably no one who deserves them more. You know him, do you? Not personally, dear boy, not as such. But my wife has a friend who has a cousin. A female cousin? Precisely. Charlie snatched a bottle from a passing waiter and filled both their glasses. Is that how that works? You just snatch bottles from waiters? To love, he said. To work, said Matthew. Theme. They clinked glasses together. So it's off to dear old Blighty in the morning, is it? Yes. Looking forward to it? Very much. Matthew spoke with conviction, even though over the past 18 months Rome had come to seem more familiar than London. And that was despite the fact that he had worked for the London branch of Cadogan's for nearly 10 years before being sent to Italy. Nevertheless, Matthew knew it would be good to get back to work in the environment where he had cut his teeth. They say that London has deteriorated a lot recently, Charlie said sadly. Practically a hardship post if you believe everything you hear, Matthew said. But where isn't these days? True, Charlie murmured. Very true. But if you've got to live behind the barricades, you might as well do it with panache. And by panache, you mean booze. Precisely, dear boy. A country that doesn't produce a passable wine is scarcely worth bothering with. And besides, the Italians have such style, such elegance. He waved a hand at the room around them. Take a look at the women here. Where would you see that kind of chic in London? I don't really... The thing is, Matthew, Italian women take fashion seriously, just as Italian men take wine seriously, whereas the English, and I'm one myself so I know what I'm talking about, are incurably flippant about almost everything, especially about important things. I never heard such a lot of drivel, Matthew said amiably. Have another glass of champagne and shut up. No, it's true, insisted Charlie. I read a report in the paper recently which claimed that Englishmen prefer their cars to sex. I ask you. The head of the Italian branch joined them. I'm sorry to see you go, Matthew, he said. You've done some good work while you were here. Naturally, I've reported back to London. Thank you. Some of the deals you pulled off here have been pretty prestigious. I've made sure they realise how much of that has been due to your enthusiasm and expertise. Let's hope there are a lot more deals waiting, Matthew said lightly. I notice a lot of these deals are extremely non-specific. Excitement, anticipation, energy churned together in his mind. As far as his career was concerned, he was on the crest of a wave, he knew, riding high. It was only a question of deciding where he wanted to go, and then going there. The flight from Rome was almost empty. He found himself sitting next to a window and hoped no one would be allocated to either of the two empty seats beside him. He was out of luck, or not, depending on your point of view. The girl who was shown to the aisle seat was very attractive. At first he kept himself occupied with papers from his briefcase, not wanting to get embroiled in conversation, but when the flight attendant came round with drinks, the two of them started talking. The girl ordered wine in a strong, determined sort of way, ignoring the soft drinks and fruit juices. Matt liked a woman with robust appetites. Quite apart from anything else, fizzy drinks during lunch often meant burps after it. I'll have the same, he said, and smiled at his neighbour as the flight attendant moved further up the narrow aisle. Helps wash down the snack, doesn't it, the girl said. Like Laura, like Gabriella, like all the women he had ever fallen for, she had dark hair, a brown which was almost black, despite chestnut highlights which glinted when she moved her head. Are you going back to London, or do you live in Italy? He asked. I'm living there at the moment, she said, in Milan. I work for a publisher there. He leaned across the gap and held out his hand. I'm Matthew Prescott. Annie Carter. They smiled at each other. Their conversation became animated. By the time they were circling Heathrow prior to landing, Matthew was beginning to feel that it would be a good thing if they could meet again. Next time you're in London, will you call me? He said. I don't think so. Annie stared soberly into his eyes. Her own were hazel, flecked with green. Why not? Because I won't be back for at least a month, she said. By then, you'll have completely forgotten who on earth I am. He displayed astonishment, and meant it. Here's my card. How could I possibly forget somebody like you? Oh, sure, she said, but she laughed as she said it. Oh, sure. Victoria was waiting for him at Heathrow. Darling, it's been such ages, and you look wonderful, she exclaimed, throwing her arms around his neck. She smelled, as she always did, of some flowery perfume which perfectly suited her everyday persona. So do you. What he always found so intriguing about her was the way she became transformed after dark, how she could change so effortlessly from a working wife and mother — she was a successful barrister — into a glamorous entertainer, witty hostess, superb cook. In all the years he had known her, she still remained something of an enigma to him. "Welcome home," she said. "We're all so pleased to have you back. The children can't wait to see you." "Nor me to see them," he said. "I take my duties as an uncle very seriously indeed." He patted his bags in a meaningful way. "I know that, Matt." His sister put a hand on his sleeve. "And I'm not just talking about the fabulous presents you bring them." Behind her back, he rolled his eyes as he followed her to the short-stay car park and dumped his bags in the back of her car. He knew what was coming next. With two sisters and a mother who had never bought the theory that mothers should sit back and let their children get on with their own lives, he had heard it all before. As they drove out of the airport and onto the M4 into London, Victoria said, as he had known she would, "Going back to children, when are you going to have some of your own, Matthew?" "I refuse to answer that question," he said lightly, "on the grounds that I've answered it at least 5 million times already. Ha ha ha." "And the answer still that you don't know?" Victoria slowed down and peered closely at him, ignoring the blaring honk of a lorry right behind her. "Sounds dangerous." "Exactly," Matt said. He closed his eyes, pretending a fatigue that he did not feel. He loved his sisters, but they could be royal pains in the backsides once they got onto the "it's time Matt was married" kick. Over the years, how many terrible women had he found himself sitting next to at dinner? How many times had he been tricked into making up a four for the theatre or a concert? It wasn't that he didn't appreciate their efforts on his behalf, recognising that they sprang from the purest of motives, i.e. the happiness of their little brother. It was just that they didn't have the foggiest idea what kind of woman suited him. Trouble was, neither did he. "We'd kind of hoped you might have met someone in Rome," Victoria said. "Well, I didn't, and I can make my own marital arrangements, thank you very much indeed. And when I've made them, I'll be sure to let you know, okay?" "Okay." Victoria drove in silence for a while. Then she said, "I've checked the flat out for you. Mr. Hassan was a pretty good tenant, all things considered." "What things considered?" Matt sat up. "What do you mean?" "It wasn't so much the livestock," murmured Victoria. "What livestock?" "As the belly dancers." "Belly dancers?" "Troops of them, night after night. All those drumming feet did terrible things to your beautiful parquet flooring." "You are joking, aren't you?" "Yes, Matthew, of course I'm joking. Everything's fine. I've stocked up the fridge with all the basics." "Smoked salmon, fresh asparagus, caviar?" "Milk, bread, eggs and fruit," she said firmly. "If you want caviar, you can buy your own." Changing gear, she added, "Remember that flat which was up for sale?" "On the floor below mine?" "Yes. It's finally been sold. They had the decorators in when I went to your place to put the groceries away." "Any idea who bought it?" "None. I don't think anyone's moved in yet. I peeked in, but the rooms were completely empty except for paint pots and dust sheets." Matt was not particularly interested. His block of flats was large and impersonal. People came and went all the time, most of them only meeting each other occasionally in the lift or the car park. This was exactly the way he liked it. The job he did was demanding enough. When he got home, he didn't want to be forced by proximity into making conversation with a bunch of almost strangers. He stared out of the window of the car. London seemed dingier than usual, the sky greyer, the buildings dirtier. He put his mood of depression down to post-flight reaction. What he wanted most of all was to get home, switch on the CD player, and relax with a drink to something cool and soothing. The winding sophistications of Kenny Barron's jazz piano, perhaps, or the silvery brass notes of the altoist Lee Konitz. That's someone showing off some research there, I think. Between them, he and Victoria humped his bags upstairs in the lift to his apartment. Opening the door, taking the first step back into the environment he had created for himself, Matthew braced himself for changes. For a moment he stood still, taking it all in, the pictures on the wall collected over the years, the carefully chosen objects, the family mementos, the furniture, modern, the best of its kind that he could afford. In the early days of furnishing his own place, he had preferred to sit on cushions rather than make do with something he found aesthetically displeasing. His mother had not shared his view. "Sorry, darling," she had said once, pulling on her gloves and adjusting what she called her town hat in the mirror in the hall. I'm not going to come and visit you again until you get something reasonable to sit on. Matt had fallen to his knees, grovelling, his tongue lolling disgustingly. Mother, please, he said. Say you don't mean it. Not come and visit me. How can I stand it? His mother had ignored him. I don't ask for anything much, she said. A simple kitchen chair will do, but you really can't ask a woman of my advanced age to squat down on cushions like a witch doctor. Witch doctors squat on the ground, he had said, laughing. They don't bother with cushions. Well, I do, she said, preferably ones with a chair attached. I suppose it's expecting too much to hope that you'll get around to acquiring a sofa before I'm in my grave. Much, much too much. He'd gone out the following week and bought his first Italian-designed chair. Remembering, he said, How's Mother? Fine, Victoria said. Terribly excited about you coming back. I expect she'll be on the phone any minute now. If she mentions marriage or women or babies or anything remotely resembling any of the above, I shall burst into tears. Don't do that, said Victoria vaguely. By the way, Jeff and I are having a dinner party 3 weeks from now. You will come, won't you? Love to. Should I bring someone? Oh, it's all right. I've got the right numbers for once. Uh-oh. What's that supposed to mean? You've asked some unspeakable woman, haven't you? I don't know what some hideous earnest female with a voice like a corncrake. But what exactly is a corncrake? I've never known. And a face like a prune, who you want me to ask out afterwards. Some one-legged single mother I'm supposed to be sorry for, or a... I have never invited a one-legged mother, either single or double, to meet you. What about that dotty woman from Dawlish? Delia? That's right, Dotty Delia from Dawlish. Oh, Matt, honestly, she had 2 perfectly good legs. She did not. I distinctly remember she was on crutches, as you very well know, because she'd broken an ankle skiing. Which proves my point exactly. It proves nothing of the sort. Victoria hugged him, her mind already on picking the 2 children up from school. How like a woman. We'll talk on the telephone, all right? Soon, he promised. And again, it's lovely to have you home. It's lovely to be home. At least, he thought it was. He poured a stiff whiskey from the duty-free bottle in his bag and added ice cubes, sipping it slowly, savouring the feel as it went down his throat, anticipating the pleasurable burn as it hit his nerve ends. Tomorrow, he would be back in the office. It was always difficult to pick up threads, take the reins up from where they'd been dropped. There would be people working there who would have joined since he was seconded to Rome, to whom he would be a complete unknown. There would have been interdepartment rows and changes of which he knew nothing. To some extent, he would be a stranger. He riffled through his CD collection, found some Charlie Parker, put it on softly, and lay back on the long, low sofa. Tomorrow could wait. For the moment, he would simply enjoy this moment of being back home. Moment.